So welcome everyone. My name is Jakob Wolman, and I will be here to walk you through this panel debate. I have prepared some questions, but I will also invite you to ask questions to these wonderful speakers. But before we start, I just want to give you a little bit of context. What is this debate about? Where do we kind of start us off? So we all work in an ever-changing environment, and we know that the speed of change is increasing. And in this world, it's been common for many companies to kind of adopt frameworks and take ready off-the-shelf solutions for their organizations. But they're not always addressing the company needs. And the company needs, as we see them, is usually the ability to respond to change, to involve employees and give them the autonomy that they need, to optimize the organization for flow, and to build a learning organization. And lately, there's been a counter-movement to installing frameworks and instead trying to meet the change organically. So try to grow and evolve the organization, follow design principles to create autonomous teams, but within certain boundaries. And in this panel debate, we will deep dive on some of those ways of evolving the organizations over installing the frameworks. I won't be doing that much of the speaking, but instead I have these wonderful people to do it. Heidi Helfand wrote the book on Dynamic Reteaming. We have Susanne Kaiser that talks about building socio-technical systems with Wardley mapping, team topologies, and domain-driven design. And then Chris Smith, that's been here to share some experiences of reteaming and self-selection. So I want to start this off with a question, and I'll start with you, Heidi, and then I invite you to come in. What does it require of an organization to evolve organically? What does an organization need to be able to do this over just buying a framework or getting consultants in to solve the solution for them?
Yeah, I really think that in order to evolve forward, we need to have confidence in our org that we can solve our own problems. And I think a lot of the times we have the answers, we know the next step, we have a current state, we face challenges day after day, we talk in our teams, we talk with our different groups, and maybe we find a solution we want to try or an experiment. I think sometimes, though, there's maybe a confidence curve to overcome. Can we actually do this? Can we actually get to the next step? Especially if the problem we're solving has a big solution or maybe impacts a lot of people. And I think really then we rely on using the retrospective as a way to talk about how things went and to determine our next move. So I think that's really about having confidence as an org and really developing that and knowing that we have a lot of the answers, so can we just try something new and reflect?
So, Chris, on that, I mean, you've kind of done this at Redgate, and you have a few years. What did it take you to be able to go through this? Just as Heidi describes, like, what was your experience of it?
Well, I mean, I think what we've been doing is asking people to choose and tell us their preferences of which teams they want to work within an organisation. We have 16 teams, and we allow people to choose where they'd like to work and sort of free that up and allow them to evolve teams' processes and practices as they join and move across teams. I guess there's confidence. I think there is that confidence part, confident that you've got the skills and the capability you need to make this, make you on your own. But I think there is a trust required from some senior leadership to say, okay, well, we're going to let go of some control. And I don't mean this in a nefarious way. That's kind of what they believe that their job is. They're there to guide this organisation and to lead it in a certain direction. And typically we reach for control, and we reach for frameworks, and we reach for patterns that we can apply, and that gives us some confidence that we're going to achieve. But perhaps there's another way where we think, well, we can trust people nearer the information, nearer the products, nearer the systems, and involve them, because perhaps they know better, perhaps they're nearer what's actually happening. So can we trust those folks and support them and guide them and give them the skills they need? But I think there's an onus on leadership to take a deliberate approach to trust people, I think.
And then, Susanne, deliberate approach to trust. How, I mean, in your experience and the tools that you use and the methodologies, how do you get to a deliberate approach with that?
Yeah, I like to point to the Western culture, organizational culture topologies, where you can classify organizational cultures between the pathologic, the bureaucratic, and the generative cultures, and where we have the generative culture of like performance-oriented versus the pathologic culture against like power-oriented with management by fear. And we have to focus on the generative culture, where we have to implement like the trust level in our organization to evolve forward. And there's also this great book about like the Accelerate book from Dr. Nicole Foskren, Jess Humble, and Jean Kim, about pointing this out, that the generative culture in an organization has a huge impact on your software delivery performance and also on the organizational performance. That has an impact on your profitability and productivity and market share of your organization. And how you can implement this is also one thing that there was one quote that how you behave will then, you can start with changing your behavior, because changing your mindset is very difficult in an organization, but also changing with your behavior first, like introducing continuous delivery management and agile management and so on, that can help you, that affects then also your organizational culture.
Yeah, and that comes back, I mean, that's also what's presented in the DORA research, is exactly that's needed to be able to get to good DORA metrics, is that generative culture. But if generative culture is that important, what is the role of a team member? What is the role of a team member in this change? Chris, what's your experience of Redgate? Like how are they part of creating this fulfilling organization and this culture?
I mean, you know, as I've said, the folks in the teams, folks building the software for our customers, building the systems, they are actually living it. They're much closer. They understand. The feedback cycle is maybe smaller. The fidelity that they see what's going on is greater. So, you know, we can choose to involve those folks in change, in organizational movements. You know, often the transformation can come from the top, and it can be quite thorough and quite plan heavy until we're going to do these stages, and then we'll be there, hooray, and then everyone will be happy. But I think, you know, I think another way to do it is to set principles and values, and then to ask folks throughout the organization to reflect on those and to see how they can improve in line with those values. You know, perhaps it's about speed of responding to feedback, listening to our customers, all those things that we write these kind of mission statements and we put them on a website and then we never look at them again. Well, perhaps we can ask the teams to think through those lenses and then come up with ideas of how they can improve in line with those. And my experience is that works. Folks want to do that. These values, often they're written down. They are plausible. They're good values. We don't tend to write things down and come up with a group of people like yourselves of things that don't make sense and don't matter. But then we forget about them and we sort of react to situations without looking through those sort of values and principles.
Yeah, we were talking about this a little bit yesterday, and I remember being at some different companies where I was participating in writing some of the values, but even to this day, I don't think I could tell you what many of those were. Years later, I was at a different company's Procore Technologies, and I was consulting. And one thing I noticed is that a lot of the software engineers that I was working with used some of the values as almost like individual agents of change in their daily work. And the values at that company are ownership, openness, and optimism. And I noticed that, you know, some software engineers would just say things like, well, in the spirit of openness, let's bring the team together and let's talk about this decision. Or in the spirit of ownership, I'm going to run with this and like I'll get input along the way, but I'll run point on this. And I was so taken by that because the values were really like principles and people were really running with them. And so they were actionable. And it it really kind of caught me as like, important for evolving the org, because it was almost like it was permission to do things and to move forward, which sometimes we're afraid. I mean, we all are. I mean, executives included. There's a lot of fear about, oh, can I make this change? How is this going to go? Everyone wants to do a good job. And, so it's like, I think, some values behaving like principles can really be tools for this kind of evolution we're talking about.
So we're talking about culture, we're talking about values, we're talking about principles, but we're also talking about organization design. Susanne, how would you get started? Like, I want this in my organization. Where do I start? Where do I get into this?
I guess it comes to the people that are driving the change. So it can start at different. You can have different entry points. So, for example, that you can start with the teams first, like analyzing, like if you would like to optimize for fast flow of change, or if you focus on the teams and analyze their current situation in regards to. What are their current challenges? What's the team cognitive load? What are their delivery bottlenecks? And try to identify, what is holding them back, and for flow optimization. So another aspect could also be if you're dealing with, also your system itself, you can also try to modularize it and try to identify themes to split it apart, or you can also go. With, like I said yesterday in my talk, about going more from a broader perspective as well, and also understand the landscape you're operating and competing in, how fast you have to evolve, like what are your competitors, what is your Wardley map, where are you located, what is your value chain to fulfill the user needs, what are your users, what are your user needs, to have this whole spectrum or this overall goal in mind, what problems you're solving for what users, and to have different entry points depending where you would like to start your change.
So, Chris, how did you get started at Redgate when you started doing these things?
I was just going to add a point actually on what
Go ahead.
Suzanne said, but I'll come back to that. So I guess we might be giving the impression that each team gets to invent their own organisation and their own norms and their own practices behind a certain number of principles. I don't think we're saying that. I think we're saying that we're allowing individual teams or groups of teams to experiment and try different approaches and work out how they can, in their sort of context, which might be very different to another context within the same organisation, how they can advance how they work. But I think there is a balance from an organisational perspective to treat the whole organisation as a team, to think about what does this whole group need. Part of, to not let go of the bigger picture while we're allowing these teams to evolve. So, for instance, with reteaming, for our self-selection reteaming, actually, by allowing experts to leave teams to join new teams, we're kind of slightly damaging an individual team. Maybe we're making them less efficient and they'll take slightly longer to do some of their work. But we think actually the organisation is benefiting from that. Because an expert can move, find a new challenge, apply their techniques elsewhere in the organisation. Because sometimes experts can feel, well, I can never leave this team. I'm too valuable to my manager. They'll never let me go. It's easier to quit and join a whole new org. So we have to think about, give teams autonomy to change within guardrails, within guides, and there should be wider organisational practices that keep the whole group sort of healthy. We're nurturing a system, nurturing sort of an ecosystem, if you like, rather than managing a machine. That's kind of the mindset, I think. And I've forgotten what your question was, I'm sorry.
How did you get started at Redgate? What started the change at Redgate?
I think we were kind of similar to many organisations where we put things on the website that weren't true. So we said, when you join, we believe in autonomy, mastery, purpose. And then when we looked at some of the techniques and processes we're applying, well, perhaps we weren't selecting things that were reflective of those values we called out. So if we talk about autonomy, mastery, purpose, which is from Dan Pink's book Drive, which I really recommend, you should ask people where they work in their teams. If you're going to call that out, then choose practices and principles that apply that. And if you value these really highly talented people that you're bringing in, allow them to have say on all this stuff, not just, how they're going to solve this particular problem, how they're going to build out this feature. Use them all in how we work and how we kind of interact together across teams. Let's involve them in those changes if we're going to call out those values. So I think it was like a shock that was like, oh yeah, we're saying these things. We need to actually use them when we're selecting techniques and practices.
So a realization of basically where you were at the point.
Yeah.
And Heidi, I mean, you've been writing and speaking about reteaming for a while now. How do you help companies get started? What's the first thing they pick up, and how do they start doing these methods?
Yeah, and just hearing this conversation, I'm thinking about a time where I was at a company and we had several infrastructure teams that were organized into 2 divisions. And a lot of people joined the company. It was in a growth phase. And it became clear to at least the engineering directors and managers that maybe there was an opportunity to organize a little bit differently, to maybe have 3 divisions instead of 2 with the teams. And I think, like Susanne said, in getting started, first was the realization that we have a challenge, we have a problem to solve, and there's many different solutions that we could employ. These directors went in an office and started to brainstorm. Here's the current state of the teams, and they drew a visual down with, these are the missions of the teams, the names of the people, and maybe any additional hiring that they would need. And they did it on a whiteboard, and then they transferred it to a whiteboard on wheels and started sketching out the future state of the 3 divisions instead of the 2, and decided that they were going to get input from the people on the teams to see, did they get the solution right? Oftentimes, time passes, we have one problem, we try a solution, we have additional problems, it's like a repeated thing. And so what I think was really cool was that, to get started is kind of like, what problem are you trying to solve, and socializing that. There's many possible futures or ways to approach solving the problem, visualizing it, getting input, and then agreeing to start. So I think some tools for reteaming are this, even writing a short document. This is the problem, this is the before state of the teams, this is the after state. And writing down some frequently asked questions about the change is another tool. And then a timeline for rolling out the change. Like with this particular one, the leaders that were trying to encourage these changes found out that after having a set of different conversations with the engineers on the teams, that they didn't quite get the solution exactly the way it needed to be, and then they made changes based on the input. And so I think having structures like a document explaining the changes, what problem you're trying to solve, having multiple communication channels talking about what's about to happen is important, because people don't tend to get the message. Even if you have an all-hands meeting, let's say we're in an all-hands meeting now, and you're talking about a change that's about to happen, some people aren't there. Some people are focused on another topic. So you have to, in the spirit, Patrick Lencioni wrote the book, The Advantage, and he talks about how many leaders have to be like chief reminding officers, and we want redundancy, right? We're always trying to eliminate redundancy or whatever, but we have to be these chief reminding officers and say things multiple times. So I think there's some kind of tools like that you can use to get started, and just knowing that you're not going to get it 100% right. Things will continue to evolve, and that's where I think it's really important to have a retrospective or a feedback loop as part of any of these plans.
Yeah, thank you for that. I was thinking to invite the audience for questions and shout them out, and I'll repeat them. Anybody that had a question for the panel? I have plenty more, but if you have something. No? Not right now? That's okay. So starting in another end, and Chris, I want to start with you here. I mean, with Conway's Law, what's the effect of making these type of changes for an organization? What's the effect on the code? What's the effect on the business? So first of all, what's your experience of what the effect brought to Redgate?
So I think at Redgate there's kind of a pre-team topologies view and a post-team topologies view. So if you've got hold of that book from Matthew Skelton and Emmanuel Payas, it's really affected us to think about how we create a team. So what we had is we have quite a wide number of products, and teams tend to get assigned to a product or a group of products. And I guess by really emphasizing the ownership of the product and thinking about your customers and being able to have some freedom on how you would sort of achieve the goals that the business has set out for that product, then you form really kind of close-knit teams that don't talk to anyone else in the organization because they don't need to. So they rewrite the same controls in their UI that work slightly differently. So if somebody buys 2 products, then they're a little bit jarring when you move between the 2. So that fantastic performance in that direction, in the stream direction, and achieving kind of really ownership of the product, but then the code suffers and the architecture suffers. So we had that problem, and we were looking at how can we really look at it and what kind of tools could we use as the ones that Susanne talks about. And team topologies really was an important step for us, where it talks about different types of teams, stream-aligned teams, which are typically what our product teams were, and then platform teams that's job is to take away sort of non-differentiating work from our product teams, the things that actually they all need to build that aren't going to help sell the product really, but have to be there, paving the road. There was an excellent talk. I'm sorry, I forgot your name, but it was an excellent talk yesterday about a platform team and raising up sort of developer experience. And also complicated subsystem teams, and how actually we had engines that were used across our product set that were being slightly different used. APIs becoming bloated because nobody owned them. And by creating a complicated subsystems team that wasn't a customer-facing team, their customers were internal other product teams, then it really tightens up that API. It became much more coherent engine that we could start to build out. So team topologies has really helped us form our teams with the reverse Conway's law maneuver, I think it's called, to sort of start to build better architecture in our product set.
But did it get to a level where the users could actually see the change in the product?
Did it get to a level? I think they'd see much more consistency across our product set. I think now they look like they're from the same company, which obviously they should have looked like that already. They had the same logo. But we have a control system, a UI control system that now is owned sort of centrally, that now all the products use. So many things come together to help with that. But the customers now buy Redgate rather than just individual tools. They understand that it's the whole suite, which is something we're really struggling with, I think.
Yeah, so Susanne, building on that, when you apply team topologies and Wardley mapping and DDD, with all these changes, it's organizational changes, it's architectural changes, what does that change bring to the business? What does that change bring to the product?
So one of the advantages is optimizing for fast flow of change, so that you are increasing your software delivery performance. And as I mentioned earlier, like this 4 years research from the Accelerate book, software delivery performance has a huge impact on your profitability, productivity, and market share. So that has a business impact on the one side, but also being able to, to gather feedback earlier, to course correct your plan, how to evolve your product, for example, to incorporate feedback from your consumers, from your users earlier, and not only twice a year when you deploy your big chunks. That is very valuable to the users and to the business as well. And so when I for example, when I was a startup CTO decades ago, and so that was long before team topologies came out, and we had also the same approach to how to modularize our monoliths back then, and also how to then share the infrastructure operations or the infrastructure complexities that we are dealing with. And I usually getting a lot of questions. So we are startup, we are small teams, and we don't have separate teams for streamlined teams or for platform teams or for enabling teams and complicated subsystem teams, because we are just one team. So, and we are just evolving and we are moving forward, so as one team right now. And what I usually then suggest is also to start with task forces first. So you have to start with first of your, for example, your bounded context where you can then the suitable themes to split your system apart, where behavior shall sit together. So when you introduce a change that it's affected only at one place, at one team, and then you can also form the streamlined teams first and then go with task forces for your infrastructure, for example, like how to deploy our system to cloud services, and then having, for example, temporary task forces that could later then result into a separate platform team providing then the platform as a service.
So one thing at a time.
Exactly. So moving incrementally, I would suggest, yes.
Heidi, what's your experience of the effects that dynamic reteaming will bring to products, to users? What have you seen?
The first thing that comes to mind is a pattern I call the isolation pattern. I was at several different companies that have applied this, well, not really applied the pattern, but the pattern was there. If you have an existing product and let's say you're continually releasing new features, you're maintaining the product, and then there's the idea and the need in the company to create a new product, it's helpful, I think, sometimes to form a team off to the side, enable that team to have process freedom, to do their discovery, to do their quicker iterations, to identify and really find the product that they need to build, but have them not be part of the regular cycle or regular rhythm or maintenance of the existing product. It helps to kind of reteam off to the side and be able to have faster iterations, because in that process of discovery, when you're ideating, coming upon the brand new thing, it helps to have a quicker cadence and not to be bound to like a 2-week iteration, for example, which is maybe too slow for what you need, but to be able to do something different, sometimes it helps to kind of reorganize separately. You know, it's the same way that if we have an emergency or an incident, small teams form, they solve the problem, they have a very tight goal, and you're not waiting for, some kind of planning meeting or something. You're just enabled to like do something different and then come back together. So yeah, I think that kind of, I write about it as the isolation pattern of reteaming. I think that's really helpful for developing new products or just like doing something different. And there's kind of a breath of fresh air sometimes in being free of an existing process that, maybe it's working for the majority of the company, but to be able to have that kind of startup within an enterprise, startup within a company is quite useful.
So that's a way to bring innovation into an existing company.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it enables that innovation and being separate and being able to just kind of work differently it can be very refreshing. I think it can, it can be very attractive. You need to be organized, it's not like, everybody has to deliver, everybody has to move forward. But sometimes, just having that freedom to do things differently is kind of nice. So.
Yeah. Question? I'll repeat it.
Hi. So I'm leading just such a team now in a large bank. So my question is, when that has succeeded, how would you go about using that to start transforming the rest of the organization so that it doesn't just become an isolated island?
So once you've applied isolation pattern and successfully launched that team, how do you spread that? How do you apply that to the bigger organization?
I think it's more, it's maybe something comes up and you have a goal in your company to start another new thing. I think it needs to be driven from something other than just, you don't want to necessarily spread it for the sake of spreading it. But I think it could become chaotic if isolated teams are springing up to create new features and not looking at the long-term maintenance of those features, you could have other problems. I was at a company and some very excited sales team professionals convinced some early developers in the company who they had a lot of camaraderie to create this one feature very fast, but we had shared code from years of developing an existing product, and then it caused a lot of friction because it was kind of like you can't, coming together to create this thing and then going back to your teams, like, well, who's going to maintain that, especially if you have that kind of legacy of the other things. And so that caused a lot of friction. I think if there is like a clear separation and there's a plan for kind of future maintenance, it tends to go a bit better. I think all of the, none of this is perfect. It's all like, we try something, we try to account for how things might play out in the long run, and we might try it again. I've seen it repeatedly for that. We're having a new product line and there's separate code base, there's a separation there. And I've also seen, that new products emerge like that, and then maybe they get sold or they become other companies. There was this one, SecureDocs, emerged out of a company that I was a part of called AppFolio, became its own company. It was just, I think, recently acquired or something by another company. But these, if you do want to spread some of these ideas, I think getting the initial team up on a stage, maybe with a lunch and learn or at a company meeting, and talking about how they built this new product, how they reorganized, how it went, I think that tends to inspire people. So if you want to influence that kind of thing, that's one thing you can do. Or maybe the people that were involved in the effort write a blog post or do some other sort of demo, I think is helpful. I think, Chris. Okay, you looked like you were reaching for it.
Yeah.
So.
Do you want to? Okay, so I just wanted to come back to your question in terms of so I guess there are different approaches. So one is like sharing the knowledge in community of practices. So to share knowledge generally, but also if there's something that another team has to work on or needs support on demand. So it could also happen by an evolution of team topology. For example, the evolution of team topology interaction modes, that you are collaborating closely together but over a limited period of time, and then as soon as the knowledge is shared, it can go into limited collaboration, limited facilitation from daily to on-demand interaction, and can go later on then X as a service where you said like sharing documents, standards, best practices with the other teams as well. So that is a combination of both of them, I would say.
Yeah, I guess I was going to suggest something, and I think it's an anti-pattern in Heidi's book, so that's probably not a good thing to suggest. Which was the idea that obviously perhaps that team has formed really well, and it's created some practices and some novel ways of doing things, and they could join other teams and take those with them. But that's breaking up a really great team, and I'm pretty sure there is an anti-pattern. But for instance, we've seen something where I work is that one team really developed a really good use of ensemble or mob programming. And over the last 18 months, some of those folks have joined other teams, and they've taken that with them because they knew it works, and they've sold that. They've been in with a new team, and they've sold it. So they've taken that practice, and it's spread much more widely. So that might be an approach as well. But I think there's also, we have to have this wider organizational view, as I said, where we need to put what individual areas and best practice novel best practice that's been developed back into the system, which is like the lunch and learn and the sharing. But perhaps there's like a default set of processes that teams use. So if you don't know what process to use, if you don't know whether to use like which agile approach, use Scrum. If you're starting a team, just crack on with that. And then when you've used that and you've got used to it and you've got into your domain and whatever else, then you can start to evolve that. Scrumban or Kanban or whichever way you want to do. So perhaps there's some learning from your team you put back into the organization's toolbox and say, if you're doing this kind of work, this kind of novel early stage work, reach with these processes first, learn from us, build on what we've done, but don't just stay there. It's probably different for your team, then evolve what we've created. So is there some way to create a toolbox of ideas that different teams can reach for and that you've proven in your kind of new team?
More questions? Yes? Yeah, so how do you motivate people that don't need to change? other people that don't need to change. I'm going to add to that.
This don't need to change. There's certainly some people that don't want to change. Yeah. You obviously, when you're going through an organisational change, and perhaps this is a new way of doing it, where we're trying to set principles and practices, and maybe we're setting direction and vision, but we want people to come with us on that journey. There's going to be some people that just get that. Yes, ask me. I want to be involved. Brilliant. And they're the kind of strong supporters, and you love those people, and you use those, and you use them to actually be big supporters of what you're trying to do. And then you're going to have some other folks that don't want to change. They're very comfortable. Perhaps the system that's working at the moment is really benefiting them in some way. And they're strong kind of detractors, and might even sabotage it and talk about how that's stupid and that these values are insane. And we've always said this, but we've never done anything different. And those folks, they're welcome to that. I can't control how they react. That's up to them. But then you've got the middle, which is people that are swing voters. And there's quite a lot. People that maybe haven't decided yet, and they can see either way. And you kind of want to use your strong supporters to bring those middle folks with you. But you're not going to persuade the people on this side. And I think something I've had to learn is there's going to be rocks thrown at this stuff. You can't stop that. This isn't going to work for everyone. You can't, and that's okay. And you probably have to sort of tune those folks out a little bit to bring the mass, to bring 90% or kind of 85% along with you on this journey, using those really strong supporters. And maybe those folks in the extremes get dragged along with it a bit because the organisation's moving and they kind of come around to that way of working and just go with it. I mean, they may leave the organisation, and we don't want that because they're typically really valuable folks. But I think you can't stop yourself doing that because you will have people that are quite anti the change, if that answers the question. Any other advice?
I would like to add to that one is also that I guess everyone has specific personal preferences, right? So some people have like to explore and discover new things, and they are really comfortable with changing and exploring, discovering things. And then also you have people or individuals that are preferring to improve and stabilize parts of your system, and then you also have individuals that prefer to mature and optimize parts of your system. And I guess, you should, coming from Simon Wardley's principles, there's one principle that says think aptitude and attitude. So it's not only your skill set that's relevant for your teams, but also your attitude, your mindset, or your personal preferences, and try to gather your teams or to arrange your teams around your personal preferences, and where you can then deliver value, for example, to other teams. You're working maybe, when we talk about the evolution stages of a Wardley map, that the people that don't like to change that much, they might be more happy with ownerships of areas of your system that are more on the right spectrum of your Wardley map, where they not need constant changes, but where they're focusing on maturing and optimizing a system, and where they are finding their happy path. And people that like to explore and discover, and they are then more leaning towards the left spectrum of a Wardley. So I would like to consider this perspective as well.
I love that. And just adding on to that, there's a lot of different opportunities, I think, in our companies to share opportunities of new areas of focus. And if you put it out there, people might volunteer in. So it's how can you create pull systems where people will go towards refreshing their place in the company? I think that it's not always hiring people in, but making opportunities inside the company known. And I think in terms of if you're trying to diffuse a change across a company, you want people to adopt a certain change, creating a pull system is also really important. And I think central to that is the change solving a problem or a pain point that people are experiencing. That's why I think a lot when trying to, if you are doing a large-scale reteaming, or if you are trying to get people to adopt a new tool, if it's tightly connected and anchored to something people feel a lot of pain about, they're probably going to want to try it. I mean, I was at a company where some of the engineering managers had to talk to enterprise customers on a regular cadence and tell them when their work was going to be done. And it was a very visceral problem because, it's hard to predict when work is going to be done, right? And so, we started a coalition with people, me and architect Tim that I worked with, we started a coalition where we taught people some advanced forecasting techniques like Julia Wester talked about yesterday with probabilistic forecasts, but the people had a clear need to solve the problem of answering the question, when will it be done? And so it was almost like we offered training and services to help solve that problem, so the change was a bit more natural. But we're not always going to get to choose whether we adopt a change or not. Sometimes it comes from the outside, and we either go along with it, or maybe we find something else to do or another place to be if we have that luxury. So I think your mileage may vary, but ideally we find that sweet spot where we're offering things that really kind of encourage people to grow and develop and be really happy at work and learning and all that. So,
thank you so much. This is what we have time for here in this forum, but you'll be around for more questions, so just come up here. It's really interesting, and thank you so much for participating in the debate.
thank you.
Thank you.